In this Nestjs tutorial, we are going to connect to Postgres database and build REST API for CRUD operations. That is API for create, the one for read, update, and delete. This lesson assumes that you already know at least the very basics of Nestjs and that you have a Postgres database ready to be connected to. So, I will start by creating a new Nest application. I'm going to use the Nest CLI and say Nest new. You can call this anything. Let me call my PG CRUD. And then I wait. Okay, I'll select package manager and wait for the installation to complete. The project has been created, so let me cd into the project folder, PG CRUD. The next thing I want to do is to install some dependencies we need for this demonstration. Because we are going to connect to database, we are going to make use of Typeorm, which is quite popular in Nestjs world, and Postgres library. I'll go ahead and copy this command here, which is npm command to install these Typeorm libraries. I'm not going to copy my SQL because we're making use of Postgres, so let me just copy this and add the one for Postgres. npm install Typeorm dependencies and pg for Postgres database. And in addition to that, I want to keep the credentials for connecting to database in a .env file. For that, I'm going to make use of Nestjs config module. I'm going to install the dependency as well for the config module. So head over to the terminal and I will enter the command to install the config module dependency. All right. With all those installation in place, let's head over and start writing some code. Now I have the project open in VS Code. The first thing I want to do is to do the configuration for the config module and Typeorm. So I'll go to app.module.ts. Over here, I want to import the config module library. So I'm going to say config module.for root. With this import here, it is expecting that there is a file at the root called .env. So I'm going to create that file .env at the root. The next thing I want to do is to import and configure Typeorm. So I'll say Typeorm module.for root or for root async. So for root async, inside here, let me import the config module so it is available within this configuration. I will import config module and inject the config service. This one I can make use of the config service to access the information in .env file. And finally use factory config service, config service. All right. So here we specify the type of database we are connecting to. In this case, it is a Postgres database. So I will select Postgres. The next thing are the connection credentials, right? So this is going to be the host. I'm going to put all those values in the .env file. So I can use the config service to read the values from .env file. I will say config service.get. This is going to be a string, and the name, let me just give it db host for the host name. Let me copy this a bunch of times for other variables. Just a bunch of times. Then the next one, the port for the database connection. So I'm going to put a plus here because this is supposed to be a number, not a string. I'm going to call it db port. Come on. And then we have the username for connecting to database. So let me call it db username. in capital letter, user name, and then password. Let's call it db password, and the database name db. Let's call this name, the database name. What we have so far are the information needed to connect to the Postgres database. But after connecting to the database, I want to create the tables and maybe update table, etc. For that, I want to tell Typeorm we have to find the entity files that are going to be used to create the tables. You can do this in different ways. So let me show you. The first one is to list out the entity files. For example, the user class. If we are going to create a user class that is decorated with entity, we are going to create entity in a moment. Another solution is to give it a pattern where to find the entity files. For example, path.join process.current working directory, and this is going to be in the dist folder. So in dist slash whatever slash the files that ends with .entity.js. So this is saying if you go into the dist folder, whatever folder, all the file that ends with .entity.js, that is this .entity.js, should be treated as entities file. Use that information for communicating with database and performing whatever database operations. One more thing I want to add here is something you should not use in real project, but because migration is outside the scope of this tutorial, I'm going to make use of it. So do not use synchronize true in real projects. So I'm going to say synchronize true. This is going to look at the entity files and use the information there to create or update the tables in the database. That is what this does. You see how dangerous it is? For example, if you make a change in the entity files, it might delete some things in your database, whatever. So this is advised against in production or in real projects. All right, so now I have this information I need to connect to the database, but I will go over to .env file now and provide the actual values for these variables. So I'll go over to .env file. The first value here is going to be localhost or 127.0.0.1. That is for DB host. And then we have DB port. Let me copy from here. DB port command. This is going to be 5432. And then the username. Here you provide your username. In fact, everything here you provide your own credentials. So my username is dev, and for the password, my password is secret. Finally, the name of the database you are selecting to connect to. So I have a database called demo. That is the database I want to connect to. All right, I think our database connection information is complete. Now I'm going to create the entity and the associated files using the CLI. For that, I'm going to say nest generate resource. Resource is going to create both the entity file, the controller, the service, and the module, and also add the module in app module. So for this, I'm going to call it cities, nestj resources cities, and I'll hit enter. It's going to ask me whether I want to use GraphQL or REST or whatever. I'm going to select REST. It's going to ask me whether to generate the CRUD files. Just some template, nothing much happening in those files. So I will wait for the files to be generated. Here you can see the files that is created. I'm going to create the controller and the service class and some DTO for create and update and also configure that in app module. Okay, so I'll go over to the files. Let's see what is inside there before we continue. This is cities, and we have the entity class. We are going to come back to this file. There's nothing inside there. And then we have the DTO, we have both for create and update, and we have the cities module. Everything inside this folder is generated by that command, REST next generate resource. Then we have the controller, we have the service, just some dummy content we're going to substitute for with our own code. And finally, that was wired up in, it was imported in app module. Okay, I will start from the entities file. For this to be recognized by Typeorm as entity file, we say at entity. Here you can give it a different name if you want to. I mean the table name. By default is going to be name of the class, but let me give it a different name called cities. This is going to be the table name we'll see in the database. Inside here, I want to have the fields that will represent the columns in the cities table in the database. The first one is going to be the ID column. This is going to be the primary key author increment column field. So this is going to be a number, and the decorator we use to tell Typeorm about that is primary generated column. The next one, let me have a field for name of the city. So this is going to be name of the city, and for the database we tell Typeorm this is going to be a column in the cities table. You can customize this further. For example, you can say that the city name has to be unique. There are other options. Then the next one, let me have description for cities. This is going to be a string, string, and we also say that it's going to be a column with type. This is going to be a text type. So this is going to be text. In addition to being of type text, unlike this one that is varchar, vasha, whatever, I also want this to be optional. So I also want this to be nullable. So you can say nullable true. Next, I think this is okay, but let me just add one more thing here, like a different type of column. Let me say active. I don't know if that makes sense here. This is going to be a boolean. Let me add column here. Column type boolean. I think that's supported in Postgres. And let's have a default value. This is optional, maybe false or true, anything. Okay, so these are the fields for the entity file. Now all these fields are going to be created in the table called cities in the database by Typeorm. To make sure that actually works, let me go ahead now and start the server and check the database. So npm run start dev. Before that, let me check the database. PSQL database is demo. Let me check. Right now there's nothing inside the database called demo. So I'm going to start the server and check the database again. Wait for that to start. Now the application is up and running. Let me see if the tables, yeah. So we have the table cities, and if you check the columns, you can see that it has those columns we specified. I think I'm missing something here. Okay, I think the command is d plus and then the table name. As you can see, we have the those columns we define in the entity file, and with the help of synchronize true, the table is created automatically along with the columns. We have the name, description, active, along with the type of data that they hold. Now I will go over to the service class and replace this auto-generated code with the actual code for the CRUD operations. At the very top, I will have the constructor. Inside this constructor, I want to inject the Typeorm repository for city. So I can say private read only. Let's call this cities repository, and we say repository. This is imported from Typeorm for type city, just like that. But at the top of it, we say at inject repository, also from Typeorm of type city. With the cities repository, let me come down and create a city. So const city to be equal to this dot cities repository dot create, and then I pass the create city DTO. But this create city DTO right now has no fields inside it. Let me go to the file. Inside this class, we are going to list out the fields we are expecting when the client sends a request to create a city. We're going to expect name, which will be a string, and description. This is optional. It is also a string. Finally, the active, which is a boolean. So these are the three fields. Remember that the ID field is auto-generated, so we are not expecting that. Also, for this DTO, I'm not going to do validations. That can be for a different topic, different lesson. So this is the DTO for create city, and over here we use that and call create with the repository. Finally, we can say const city to be equal to, or let me just return on this line, await. So this is going to be async. Await this dot cities repository dot save. At this line, this city is not saved to the database yet, but we have to call save to save it in the cities table. This should be async. Oh, come on, what am I doing? Then for find all, this is going to be straightforward. We are just returning all the cities in the database. So I'm going to say this is also async. I'm going to say await this dot cities repository dot find. And then for find one, that is to find a city by the ID, I'm going to also do in one line. I'm going to say this is also async. So I'm going to say await this dot cities repository dot find one, but we want to find one by ID. So I'm going to say where ID equals the ID that is supplied. That is this ID here. Then for update, I'm going to reuse this find one to first find the city. So I'm going to say city to be equal to await. So once again, this has to be async. Await this dot find one and then supply the ID. But if the city is not found, if no city found, I think at this point it is okay to throw an exception, because we cannot edit a city that is not found. I'm going to throw a not found exception here. Not found exception. What is going on? Okay. So I'm going to say new not found exception. However, if the city is found, I'll just do object.assign the city and then the update city DTO. So I'm going to kind of merge the two with this one overriding whatever that is here. Finally, I'm going to await this .cities repository.save to save the updated city information. And then the last method here is to remove a city. So I'm going to copy the code to find a city or throw a 404 if it's not found. But if it is found, I'm going to return, say await this .cities repository.remove. What do I want to remove? The city. Okay, so here we have all the methods for the CRUD operation. For create, these two for read, that is to fetch data, and this is for update. Finally, we have one for delete. The CLI command we ran before also auto-generated the controller with some default that makes sense. For example, this is to create. It takes the city, create city DTO, and calls the service method for create city. You can see that in the constructor, we already have the cities service injected. And then we have the one for find all, find one, update, and delete. All thanks to the CLI for generating the codes. Now I can head over to the REST client. In this case, I'm using Postman, and send off the request for the CRUD operations. The first one is to create a city. So my URL is localhost 3000/cities. As you can see from the controller, this is prefixed with cities. Now let me go ahead and send the request to create a city. Something went wrong. Let me check the terminal. So the problem is coming from cities module. The Typeorm repository we have here, we have in the service, not here. We need to go to cities module and tell it to import Typeorm for city repository. To do that, you go to the module and say import. Inside here, we say Typeorm module.for feature. And then I have an array. Inside the array, I'm going to list all the entities used in the services, in the providers. Right now, what I have is for city, so I'm just going to say city here. And that should solve the problem. Let me check the console now. Now the dependencies and stuff are resolved. I will try to create the city again by sending the request. This time it was successful. We created a city. Let me quickly test out the other endpoint. Let me add another city. Let's say New York 2, and add another one. I don't know, just put something there. So I have 3 cities created now. Let me call the endpoint to fetch the cities. You can see we have the list of the 3 cities. And to find one by the ID, for example, the ID 1, this should return the New York City, which was the first one. To update, right now the status is false for city with ID 1. Let me change that to true. You can see we get true, and if I find it again, the result is true. And for delete, let me delete the second city, that is New York 2. That is deleted. If I call find all now, this record should be deleted. Alright guys, we have seen how to connect to Postgres database in Nestjs and perform CRUD operation. Before I wrap this up, let me quickly show you what I mentioned at the early stage. So I said that here you can just list out the entities. Right now I have the city entity, only that. If I save this and try the operations again, it's just going to work the same. I don't need to restart the server, but let me just restart that. So I'm going to call the endpoint, for example, to find cities. You can see that it works the same. But for benefit of doubt, let's do some kind of negative testing whereby we break this without listing anything in the array. So I'm going to check the application starts again, but let me go to Postman and send off a request. You can see we have an error, right? The application started because, in the array, it can be 0 or more list of entities. So if it's 0, it means there is no table we intend to interact with. But you can see that the application crashed because it cannot find information about city. But if I restore that and the application starts again and I send the request, you can see that that works again. So we are free to choose whatever approach you prefer, whether you want to list out all the entities here or you want to provide a pattern like we've seen before. Alright guys, this brings us to the end of this lesson. I hope it makes sense. Until next time, enjoy coding.